And I think we are ready to begin. We are Let me just see if we can connect here with the Moshmans. For all you guys that are just tuning in, thank you for tuning in. And this should be a pretty cool night tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun with the Moshmans. First time ever, I think we've had the duo on commentating a final table. So let's bring them on. Guys, are you there?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, listen, you guys are the professionals. You can follow both you guys at Team Moshman for you, Collin, and at Katie_Dozier, correct?
Yeah.
All right, so they can tweet questions to you during it if they want. You guys feel free to plug anything you want and have a good time. This is going to be, I think, a quick, fun, fast final table to watch.
All right, sounds good.
All right, take it from here, guys. Have fun.
All right. So yeah, we are at the final table of WCOOP 17. This is going to be a really exciting one with 10-minute blind levels. It should play out very fast, a lot of all-ins, and a fun one to comment on and watch.
A fast and dirty final table, if you will.
All right, so I don't know about the dirty aspect, but I guess you never know. Maybe some like string bets, some bad table talk.
Yes, or typing in the chat box and that being declared binding and then not following through in the action, for example.
You never know. You never know. So here we are, the average stack at this point. We can go ahead and pull up. So about 1 million, 1.3 million. So it's playing out at about 25, 30 blinds. So pretty fast-paced.
Yeah, definitely. We were expecting this to go pretty quickly with this sort of turbo structure. Definitely a fun tournament that I wish I was playing in, but I'm just as happy to be commentating on the action.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So we definitely expect to see a lot of 3-betting at this stage, and players in general getting it in lighter compared to a lot of these final tables, just because the stack depth is so much shorter.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and so we're going to be expecting a lot of fast action, especially from the shorter stacks at the table, such as Slayer Pole, who's sitting on just over 500,000, and Hit Me Up, who's just a bit over than that, and then there's another stack similar to that, and then even a stack that's under 10 nominal blinds.
Yes, yes. So it should be pretty fun and fast. I'm not actually recognizing, and Katie, correct me if I'm wrong here, too many of the names at this table. And we've just asked our friend Katie75013, who knows everybody.
Katie so knows everyone, so if she's saying, I'm sorry if you're at the final table and are pissed off that we don't know you, but I'm not recognizing
We might
anyone.
be slighting people right now, but when Katie tells me she doesn't recognize many of the names, I'm assuming there aren't too many superstars, but if we're wrong about that, please tweet to us or let us know, and we'll happily correct that.
Definitely. And even if you're pissed off, we'll still accommodate.
Yes. Even if you're hostile to us, that's cool.
So the starting pot is definitely very significant in this. You know, Collin, how sometimes you tease me because I anal retentively like to multiply the starting pot times 0.66 to kind of get a feel for an anti-adjusted big blind. And I would put the anti-adjusted big blind at just under 70K.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely becomes shorter effectively with the ante. Last pot is probably going to be how a lot of these play out, where Matsson's open raises in the small blind, takes it down with the c-bet, because it is a fairly significant ante of 1/8 of the big blind. It's a nice incentive for players to come in, aggress widely, and even when they get called by a player like the big blind, have a lot of overlay to subsidize that confrontation.
Yeah, I mean, having such a large starting pot can make, light 3-betting a lot more profitable and interesting. And personally, if I was sitting at this final table and had a real good stack, I would be thrilled, especially not really recognizing many of the names. You're going to have a lot of players that, tend to not really adjust for the ante, and, therefore there's more that can be taken advantage of. Yeah, I'm surprised to see that fold in the small blind by one of, if not, the basically essentially tied for second stack at the table. I would be folding very, very few hands personally in that spot.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Katie pointed out, effectively when you adjust for the ante, it's similar to an ante this blind that makes it under 10 blinds effective. And furthermore, there are a couple of shorter stacks, so the big blind there might be pretty risk averse, even if he had a calling hand. like, say, pocket fives, which should definitely be a call, there's a good chance that a player like that player may not make that call.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, one of the things I really look for when I am at a final table is trying to assess how much laddering up means to the other players. And when you have a situation like this final table where a lot of the players are clustered in the, especially when you adjust for the ante, the 10 to 15 big blind stack, there's going to be a lot of maneuvering that the bigger stacks can do, especially if they are, really looking to ladder up the smaller stacks.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point there. So we are on break for another few minutes, so we'll be right back in just a couple of minutes to finish this up. we are back, so hopefully the audio is in fact audible. Now we need confirmation of this. How are we going to get it, Katie?
Yo, shout out to my homies on the west side. Can you tweet at me?
Okay, so Zach is saying that we are in fact live. I hope that's the case. We apologize for the technical difficulties wherever they may have been stemming from. And we have a couple of eliminations to go through during this interlude.
Yes, we do. As this being a turbo, it's one of the worst times you can have a technical error, in my opinion. It sucks.
Yes.
That's life.
And we were giving awesome commentating, so you guys, you just have to trust us that we were owning this joint.
Or trust Collin, because I'm not so sure.
One of the two. So the first elimination occurred when Mind Gamer open shoved a nominal 11 blind stack into Slayer Pool, and it was a pretty standard confrontation. Mind Gamer had Queen 7 suited, which I think is a pretty good shove.
Yeah, definitely. And we learned from Shaniac, who was kind enough to tweet at us and let us know that indeed there were actually some names in the field that we were not familiar with as the result of not playing online as much. And for those people that are still in, that includes Mind Gamer,
as well as Slayer Pole, Serenity with a 7, and Matson's as potential regs. Another all-in here. We've got 9-8 suited versus Ace-Queen. Obviously, the flush draw gets there.
Well, that's life.
So that was, I think, another fairly standard situation where Mathib had a very short stack. He didn't want to lose his remaining fold equity and just jam the mid-suited connectors, a strong play, and Mind Gamer has a clear ISO shove with the ace-queen off.
Yeah, I definitely think that was obviously a good shove by the short stack. In the same vein, I think that even some good players will often make a mistake with shoving a hand that is too weak, and, you know, even though you can be in a situation where you're willing to take minus chip EV spot, given the fact that you're the short stack, oftentimes it is actually better to take the blind.
Yeah, so for sure. If he had total junk there instead of the 9-8 suited, then he wouldn't want to go ahead with that shove.
But personally, if I'm in that spot, I'm pretty thrilled to see 9-8 suited.
Yeah, could be a lot worse. And you'd rather have a hand like 9-8 suited than a hand like Queen Deuce off.
Yeah, that's funny. That's exactly the hand I was thinking of when you said that. Yeah, I'd much rather have that. Yeah. I mean, obviously the reason for that is that the 9-8 suited plays better when you're called.
Right, exactly. Definitely has higher equity against an opponent calling range. So we now have a couple more eliminations and another stack dynamic is going to be great for the bigger stacks like Serenity here on the button to aggress, because the cutoff in this hand, Ajax F-Sight, is super short, and most of the mid stacks are probably going to want to ladder up. Yes,
although I would differ with you in the pronunciation of that player's name and say that it's 7 Trey, but that's cool. We've got to disagree a little if we're going to comment together.
We do, but in this case you're clearly right, so it's probably not a good one for me to argue about.
Hey, I ain't hating. I don't know why I'm talking so ghetto during this.
No, that's good. You're back to your Ali G days.
Booyak the Shah, check it.
So definitely some fast action here. 7 Tree comes in with the min raise, which is exactly what he should be doing. A player like Umamba or Slayer Pole just has to get out of his way if they value laddering up, and the prize jumps are pretty significant.
Yeah, this is a very advantageous spot for that player. I would be opening super wide and loving life.
Yeah, definitely, for sure, because right now there's 7 guys left. You must know you make 18K. Now, to me at least, 18K, pretty awesome.
I would take it.
But compared to 113K, those are massive jumps. You know, even if you just ladder up a few more spots to close to 50K, for most players, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it definitely is. And, you know, it's going to be very significant to most players, and that's why you can get away with more as the biggest stack in general.
Yeah, for sure. Now, another thing we've noticed at this table, and it's happening right now with Mind Gamer, I'll interrupt that for 1 sec. He min raises, and we have a 4 blind shove. This guy should be in a pretty wide range based on how short he is.
Instead, he has kings, which is the rule of nits. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know if that guy's a nit, but
oh, nasty for him. That sucks.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. You get blinded down to 4 blinds, get kings, and then you know, get taken out. But that's a lesson. Don't get blinded out.
Don't get blinded out. And great news for Mathib, who was forced to pretty much wait for something to resolve himself with the Uber short stack, but now has a lot less to lose since he's the new short stack when he open shoves.
Yeah, that's really going to affect, obviously, with ICM. He has no reason to tighten at this point. So we're going to, hopefully, if he's playing correctly, look for him to be shoving pretty wide in spots like this.
Yeah, definitely. And meanwhile, 7 Trey to continue to abuse this new bubble situation where a lot of players are going to want to ladder up. One thing I was saying earlier, Katie, is it looks like almost all the players are min-raising at this stage of the game. Is that what we're expecting to see instead of an occasional larger open?
Yeah, I mean, generally you're going to see a lot of regs and stuff do that. And I mean, for me, like when we got back on Pokerstars a bit, when we're in Mexico only, obviously, which we're not now, one thing I noticed is that, a lot of recreational players are copying more good things that the pros do, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. So a nice 3-bet shove by Slayerpool a hand or two ago. Now Mafib shoves. Unamba's getting really good odds here. The pot's 600. It's going to cost him about 350 to call, so not quite 2-1, but really good odds. Ace-6 looks like a pretty reasonable call there, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, unless you know that, you expect the other player's 3-betting range to be super tight. I mean, I think it's, again, it's the kind of hand where when I raise that, I pretty much try to already know what I'm going to do if that guy shoves, since he has a stack that makes it so likely that he's going to.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you know that you really don't want to call his shove, that might not be the best time to open Ace-6 off in the cutoff with him in the big blind.
Especially as a mid-stack, yes.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's definitely a real blow to his stack or any of the mid-stacks when they have to double up a short stack.
Now, I'm surprised to see that fold again. I mean, there are some hands certainly I would fold in the small blind there, 7-Trey did, but I would be raising the extreme majority of hands there with, I realized that the other player did double up, but he's still, Matson is still very much a solid mid-stack and should be disinclined to play a hand in that situation.
For sure, for sure. And a raise fold by Manson's a good spot for Umamba to 3-bet shove, given the nice risk-reward ratio and the fact that Manson's is probably on a pretty wide range open raising in the small blind.
Definitely. Now, what's interesting about this, I mean, obviously it's unnecessary to shove the amount he just did, about 20 nominal blinds at the same time. If you're looking at a reg in the big blind who you don't think that you have a lot of fold equity against or anything, or an edge on, then that can be, a way to play long ball.
Absolutely. So, Katie, what would you say that his range is there? Like, what kind of hands would you expect him to turn over if he had been called?
Well, assuming that he's a decent player, I would expect him to turn over, low pocket pairs, low aces, decent broadways, that kind of a range.
Yeah, absolutely. So unexploitable shoves, definitely not junk, but also probably not the premiums where he'd be a lot more likely to raise small and induce.
Yeah, unless he'd been shoving a lot at that stack depth and decided to balance.
Oh, snap.
What? What is this, 1992?
Oh.
Crisscross make you want to jump? No, okay.
Oh, man. All right, I got owned there. Speaking of getting owned, my gamer has just gotten 4-bet shoved on, and a nice shove by 7-Trey, and it might indicate that Mind Gamer is 3-betting light when he picks that spot in the small blind, and then folds fairly quickly to 7-Trey's 4-bet.
Yeah, that's pretty much likely what it indicates. It also can be kind of like a brag, like, yo, I can 3-bet you light and snap fold.
Yes, so if this game were taking place in the hood, that's possibly what it would indicate. And again, a very reasonable stack size to 3-bet smaller here. And a lot of the regs now are 3-betting quite small. You often even see 240 or even closer to min 3-bets, but 270 looks fine, and it looks like Matson's is 4-betting. Do you think he's ever light here, Katie?
Well, looking at the looking at the size, it looks like the kind of sizing that's hoping to induce a shove. Of course, I never want to say someone's never light there, but that tends to look like he's trying to induce a shove and is very happy with his hand.
Yeah, absolutely. So, most of the time that is going to be strength, but definitely, particularly if he is a reg, there's a chance that he's 4-betting light, in part because he thinks it's a good spot, and in part because he doesn't want people to walk all over him, 3-betting his opens with impunity, and so he puts up a stand for meta benefits as well.
Yes, which is especially important at a final table that's not likely to last, though.
Okay, okay. Fair enough, fair enough. So we get to what seems to be a fairly rare flop at this final table. And moderately dry. There's certainly some straight draws out there, but we expect Serenity to continuation bet almost this entire range.
Yeah, definitely. And that's kind of interesting sizing to me because it's perhaps slightly bigger than I would expect to see from a reg on that kind of a flop.
Yeah, it is maybe slightly big. And Madsen's could have potentially given him trouble and floated or something on that texture, but it's also not so bad to play hit to win from his position, to some extent at least, because he does have position and is getting very compelling odds pre.
Yeah, one thing I want to talk about too is we saw Slayer pull open shove for a pretty large nominal effective stack. And I think that can be interesting because when you're at the final table or the late stages of a turbo MTT, it can be the kind of situation where maybe you feel tired or, maybe you just think, oh, it's not bad to shove, so I just shove. But I think that, it can be really important to not play a long ball style unless it's really dictated by the action.
For sure. Some of the play could be due to fatigue. This tournament has been going on for well over 7 hours now. Big pot brewing potentially between 7-tray and Madsen's. 7-tray raised pre-flop, continuation bet the flop. His range probably still pretty wide there, but maybe a bit narrower at this point once he's following through on the turn.
Yeah, definitely.
And Katie, what do you think about Madsen's possible range at this point once he calls flop and turn?
He could be on a flush draw. He probably has a hand, I think, like something like Queen 5 or some sort of decent hand that he's looking to show down that he thinks likely could be good, but there's no reason to really push the action out of position.
For sure, yeah. Or Ace-5, Pocket 8s, maybe a non-premium 10x hand.
Pocket 8s he would have 3-bet, though. He didn't 3-bet pre.
That's a good point. He probably would have 3-bet pre with the 8s. Possibly a 10x. And if 7-tray, so he gets a full on the river, if he was barreling through the turn, that's a pretty good card to bluff on the river, because if Madsen's does have a hand like Ace-5, it's going to be really tough for him to call a final large river barrel there.
Yeah, it's interesting too. And then, betting about half pot, I think, looks on that particular board more like trying to get value possibly from a 10 or something than it does as being just a bluff.
Yeah, so it would be pretty sweet if we got to see the hands after, but quite possibly there's 7-tray applied ICM pressure to get Madsen's to fold a hand like 5x.
Yeah, and if I was in that position, I would be thrilled with the River King. It's such a good bluffing card.
Yeah, for sure. If he was just barreling, then really good chance he follows through on the river. Now, Mind Gamer here on the button has a difficulty in that he might want to open wide, but 2 stacks that are perfect for 3-bet shoving in the blinds. How much, Katie, do you think that should tighten his opening range?
Of course it depends on the individual players and how tight they are and their prospective 3-bet percents, but in general, it's, I believe, going to make you play slightly tighter when you know you're so likely to get shoved on.
Yeah, for sure. So particularly, let's say, hypothetically, they were pretty aggro regs, then you really don't want to even min-raise and fold a ton of the time to a shove. So you're going to want to narrow your opening range, widen your calling range, and if you just keep on opening like 50, 70%, whatever, huge number on the button, then you're going to be bleeding a lot of chips that way against aggressive 3-betters.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Unless Mafif was a super tight player, I would definitely not open anything on the button that I wasn't willing to call a shove with.
Yeah, or for sure, not really raise fold too much there, for sure. So only 6 players left, and the prize jump's definitely still pretty significant, and we're at 24,900 now. And with each jump, it's a minimum of 8K, often closer to 20K, more close to first place. So still definitely great opportunities for 7-tray to come in and aggress super wide.
So it looks like Slayer is still sticking to more of a long ball strategy, which I think can really hurt you when there's a shorter stack also left to play.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see if he goes for the 3-bet shove here. Very reasonable risk-reward ratio on this shove. He's shoving 15 blinds over a min-raise. and really adds nicely to his stack without a showdown when that works.
Yeah, considering how wide 7 tray really should be raising in that spot, I think it's definitely a 3-bet shove that you can do pretty wide.
Yeah, absolutely. So any pair, any suited ace, suited broadways, and depending on how wide 7 tray is opening, potentially quite a bit wider, including hands like mid-suited connectors, hands even like 10-7 suited, or even worse, just depending on how active he's being and how wide he defends against 3-bets.
Yeah, definitely that's a time where I would be happy to have my fold to 3-bet percent in action. But, that's the positive thing about being a mid-stack at this particular table is that you really have, especially when you're a mid-stack that's, not short, you have a lot of leeway and you can pick up really nice spots.
Definitely. So, snap call by 7 tray. He 3-bets and snap calls off the 4-bet and loses to Umamba. I think this one pretty much plays itself from both sides.
Yeah, definitely fair on both sides, so to speak.
Yeah, really legit there. So, like we were saying at the beginning, there's definitely a huge component of this game that's 3-betting. We've seen a lot of wide 3-betting. We're seeing a 3-bet right now.
Yo, you was a prophet, didn't you?
Yes, Ali G, I am a prophet.
They should have done the little banner for Quad Jacks with you and Ali G.
And the 4-bets, we'll see a match since is 3-betting light. It's kind of surprising to me, maybe that's just because I'm a nit, that in the big blind he made a light 3-bet against the under-the-gun player. Is that common, Katie, among you cool, young, trendy players, the 3-bet light there?
I don't know if I qualify as a cool, young, trendy player anymore. But no, I mean, I would think, you see a player raising under the gun and, it's going to affect your range, certainly.
Yeah, definitely make you 3-bet a bit tighter. But then, of course, maybe he'll think that Umamba reasons that and will therefore tighten his 4-bet range, etc. But definitely seems like Madsen's is capable of making a play at this point.
Yeah, and so with the starting pot being 180, I'm thinking about the big blind as being roughly 120, which of course doesn't mean that, I would only shove if I had an anti-adjusted 10-blind stack, but I think it's a good thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely, and with that metric in mind, Umamba previously open-shoved about 14 blinds in the small blind, now about 12 blinds on the button, so definitely a real mix of players doing small ball and long ball approaches at this table.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, personally, I would tend to favor a small ball type approach in this situation if I was a mid-stack. Obviously, if you're the short stack here, I'm not saying you can raise fold with 3 blinds or whatever, but...
Yeah. Now, with the 3-betting also, and another 15 blind or so, a bit more than that shove by Mind Gamer, one thing that's kind of interesting is which players actually have the flexibility to 3-bet small and not risk their whole stack. So in the meanwhile, Mafib open shoves, presumably quite wide, called by aces, pretty nasty.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're obviously shoving any pocket pair there is the nuts when you have 3 blinds on the button.
Yeah,
but another reason why, I mean, when there's just such a short stack, I think, playing super long ball is just really such a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. Another pot that goes to a flop. We expect 7 tray once again to continuation bet super wide, and we'll see how the action unfolds from that point.
Do you ever say C-bet anymore?
No, I'm trying to sound smart, okay?
I think you sound smart.
Well, thank you. You will make a continuation bet on this flop. Just under half pot. Umamba calls. So, again, 7 trays on a pretty wide range. Umamba we're expecting maybe as a hand like pocket 6s, maybe 8x, maybe a hand as strong as queen x.
I think most pocket pairs he probably would have 3-bet free. But yeah, I think hands like that, he could possibly have a queen, but it's unlikely. I think an 8 is some sort of 8 holding.
So if you had 6s in Umamba's spot, you would have 3-bet pre there?
Against 7 tray that I presumably think is opening very wide, yes, I would have 3-bet.
Okay, I would have flatted. Does that make me way too tight?
Yes. No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, I don't know what he would have done. Maybe you're right. I do think that with Slayer Pole being short, possibly that's going to make him take a slightly more conservative... Yes!
He didn't 3-bet that?
Oh, yes.
Look, it's the knits uniting.
All right, I'm dead. You guys can't see it right now, but I'm dancing.
That's fortunate for you guys.
I was proven triumphantly correct.
How did he have 9s there? How do you not 3-bet that? What?
No, so I am a bit surprised to see his 9s. But from his perspective, Slayer pool is a lot shorter, and he doesn't necessarily want to 3-bet and face a 4-bet, so he plays a little bit slower.
I don't like it.
That's what a brother can relate to.
Well, I can't relate to that personally because I would have 3-bet so fast your eyes would have burned.
So you would have 3-bet, but then you wouldn't stack off, would you have? If you were, say, 40 blinds deep with 7 tray? But that's fine. I mean, you don't always have to 3-bet, and then it's not like 7 tray looks like he's necessarily 4-betting, 5-betting super wide. He's folded hands he could have opened. So he probably would be on a pretty tight 4-bet range in that spot.
Well, and that's another... I mean, I'm not thrilled with playing 9s out of position, generally.
Right, for sure. Mind gamer with a long ball approach. So with these players, they're definitely in different spots. So Slayer Pool, we mainly expect to open shove. He has under 10 nominal blinds. Mind gamer has a great 3-bet shove stack, and the rest of these guys are a little bit deep for any of that. Right as I'm saying that, Matchson's just open ships about 27 blinds in the small blind. What do you make of that, Katie?
I make that this is becoming a super long ball final table, and often when you see someone playing long ball, it translates into a million people. So that's a snap just call, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, with the ace-5 suited, wow, and a river too.
I definitely agree with the shove, and the call.
Yeah, so the shove...
Although the call is the problem. I mean, I think I would just probably reshove, which you don't want to put yourself in a bad situation.
Yeah. So definitely reasonable, at least on both sides. Another long barrel shove by Umamba. Part of the issue with that, I mean, it can be a good approach, but part of the issue is that it really cuts down on your risk reward when you're doing stuff like open shoving 20 blinds, and it limits the range of hands you can play.
So we've got another all-in here.
Yep, ace-6 suited. This time the lower suited ace is not spike. Slayer Pool with good call there in the small blind and brings it to four-handed action.
Yeah, another problem, though, with a long ball strategy, too, is that when you wake up with a huge hand, if you've been shoving every single time you've played a hand and then suddenly you get aces and min-raise, that's probably going to be pretty clear to people.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the issue. If you are only playing long ball, then you're pretty much limited to hands that are profitable to open shove, and that's going to have to tighten you up more than you probably want to be at a table where accumulation is vital. Now, they're talking about a deal. Katie, how likely do you think it is that they're going to be able to come to this arrangement?
I mean, it seems like when people do this, they come to a deal about 1 in a billion times, unless it's like 3 guys who all know each other that are great players sitting at the table.
Okay, then I'm going to prop bet you right now that they do reach a deal. What do you say to that?
I'd say, what's the bet on?
Oh. Well, I don't know that aspect.
Okay, well, we'll work that out.
Yes, we'll work that out. Yeah, one of the problems with deals, so I think it's very likely they're going to at least look at numbers, but usually there's at least one player who wants more than their ICM share, and other players are reluctant, and that's probably the most common reason they break down.
Yeah, well, and also this being, a pretty prestigious event with being a WCOOP, people are going to care about actually taking the win and everything as well. Much like when you were in a Venetian deep stack and there was a trophy involved and you were talking about making a deal and you offered to give the trophy up because you didn't care about the trophy and you just wanted the most money.
Yeah, that guy wanted the trophy, but guess what? Now it's sitting in my office just to our right.
Because the deal didn't happen. But yeah, it is funny how much value people place on things like that, even just goofy like tokens from winning like a GM daily. Some people, I guess it's not so goofy though. If you're a recreational player, you want something to show your friends and brag about. I shouldn't belittle that, I guess.
Yeah. Nano Noko asking, hello, let me know how I can help you. Kind of telephone operator-like, but
hey, that's
very
polite.
pleasant.
I respect that.
No, it's very pleasant. It's very pleasant, and obviously an amazing player. So it'll be interesting to see if they do manage to do something, But from our perspective, it's a lot easier to commentate when people are actually doing stuff. So I would give them the advice to play it on.
Yeah, I would say play it on, because otherwise we're not going to have much to talk about.
Yeah. We were looking for a while in advance. They came to us at Quadjacks and said, "Do you want to host one of these?" So I said, "Yeah, we love working with you guys. We'd be happy to do that. It'll be a lot of fun." But then a lot of these had like half-hour blind levels and stuff. And Katie, you are a deep stack master. But
I don't know about that.
Those are going to play like 100 blinds deep. I said, this one we're going to have some action to commentate on. So
yeah, not many flops though. They're really making it so that it's just pre-flop with how long ball they're playing. But if you were sitting at this table, would you be inclined to deal, generally speaking?
I think that it depends a lot, how much the money means to you. At this table, I would want to play on. I just think that guys are being so long ball that a player who takes a smaller ball approach should have an edge here, just because he's going to be able to play more hands and have a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, that's definitely how I feel. I really feel like maybe these guys are playing a ton of tables or something, which I would think would be a pretty big mistake with this much money on the line. But I would really be looking to play this and not play a long ball style, because it seems like these players are almost frustrated by the idea of not playing that way.
Yeah, absolutely. There really might be some frustration. And now they're considering the numbers. We've got Umamba 81K, 7-Trade just less than 77, Slayer Pool 76, Matson's at 60. So a fairly tight grouping in these numbers.
Yeah, how much is our cut though? We got to type in. And what is it? We can type in rap for $1. For example.
Yeah. That would be pretty sweet if we started begging for $1.
Yeah. But what are more things that you look for when you decide to possibly make a deal?
Well, one thing for sure is the numbers. Now, what's interesting is that one player is saying that he's surprised that Matson's gets 60K. And the thing is that from ICM's perspective, the more chips you have, the less valuable they are. So if they do go to chip chop numbers like Nanonoko is offering, we're expecting Matson to go down quite a bit and how much he'd be receiving, and the big stacks to go up. And if I were Matson's, I absolutely wouldn't stand for that.
No, definitely. It's if you're making a chop, you need to know what is advantageous for you if you're the short stack in particular, and that's definitely a good summary of that. And it can be important, I think, as an MTT player to have some idea what your skills are going to be for chopping, because it will come up in live tournaments a fair bit. Like I remember one time in a daily that I got everyone to agree to give me more than first place.
Wow.
But then the tournament director was like, "You can't do that." And it was like, "This is my business." No. So then I was like, "Okay."
Wow.
Then
you really said that to TD?
No, I didn't say it like that. But I was just like,
Jesus.
"Oh." I was a little pissed off though. I feel like if people it's not like I was expecting them to add to the prize pool.
It's what? It's not his place. If you're able to get people to agree to that, then that's out of line, I think. It's interesting. These are the chip chop numbers, and they're not actually quite as different as I had thought. Matson's is down like we expected, but only to about 57K. And as a result of that, I guess he's saying that he wants to just play it out.
Well, good. We know who we're rooting for now, huh?
Yes, take it down, Matson's.
Yeah, I always root for the short stack anyway.
And now someone's asking if he would take the ICM. I think he needs to just say, you know what, I'm going to play this. He won 65. There's no way. I'm going to go on record as saying there's almost no way that they give him 65.
If they do, I'd be pretty impressed with that negotiation.
Yeah, if they give him 65, basically what they're saying is, you have made us your bitch.
Well, it's also like we've reached that part in the tournament now where someone says what they want and other people try to convince them that what, a lesser number is an okay amount. And in my experience, that just so rarely happens because the immediate response of the person is to get really defensive and want even more money.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's definitely looking like it's not going to happen. I don't think that they're going to want to give Matson's any more than ICM, and even that's debatable. Looks like he's not going to take it. And there comes a point also when it's very late for them. I think someone is pretty soon going to say, let's just play it out. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, but I think the fact that they're talking about a deal is more of a symptom, too, of it's seemingly all of them right now playing a long ball strategy that's going to be higher variance in general.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that Umamba is saying is something you hear a ton when you're talking about deal making, which is basically like with one all in, you're through, and anything can happen at this point. What do you think, Katie, about that kind of argument when it comes to deal making?
I think it's absolutely stupid. I mean,
Okay.
of course anything can happen. Of course, one suck out. It's just them trying to use fear or whatever to get what they want. But Nanoko is smartly trying to move this along and has realized the futility of it, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true. I mean, one suck out can cripple you, but one suck out can double you. So it always works both ways with that kind of a thing. And I do think that they're going to be continuing any moment.
I think so, too. 7 Trey has said they want to play, and Anoko's probably like, God, finally, these fuckers, we're never going to deal.
Yeah, absolutely. One question that's come up in the chat that Zach is alerting us to is Nolzaz asks, are there good resources for making deals in poker? And one of the key things is just being able to come up with the ICM numbers.
There are apps for that, definitely. I know that I have on my phone an ICM app and a Chip Chop app, and I believe both were free. So just search those in whatever phone you have, and you'll be able to find them. And it's really an important thing, I think, to have when you're playing live especially.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's one key. Now, we can get back to that in a moment. Interesting hand, Umamba opens his button, then checks back this flop. What do you think, Katie, about his check back range on a flop like that?
I think, it's pretty polarized, I would tend to say, because it's kind of a weird flop to check back.
Yeah, I think if he was really strong, it's coordinated enough, I believe he would most likely bet. But he could definitely have a hand like ace high, king high. I mean, king high here would make some sense because he then called the turn bet. So maybe he has ace queen, king queen, something like that. So a lot of those hands we'd expect him to value bet at this point.
He could have something like ace 4 or something, but now he's betting and a snap fold from there.
Yeah, so I would definitely guess he had a king or a queen, which would explain both checking back the flop to some extent. He may still want to c-bet, as well as calling turn and then presumably value betting the river, although obviously it could be a bluff. And we don't know. We can't see the cards.
We can't?
Man, it's so lame when I just degenerate into saying retardedly obvious things.
No, I'm just teasing you. It's not bad when we make a joke out of it. If I wasn't here, it'd suck, but...
Yeah, it really would.
Kidding.
It really would. I'd
I'm
just be
kidding.
rambling. 3-bet shove by Matchins with a 14 or 16 blind stack, so nice risk reward for him there.
It's also the shortest stack, so again, this is a shove I would be making pretty wide. Definitely, I would shove this with any pocket pair, any suited ace.
Yeah, I think here I'd even go all the offsuit aces. I think you might have a lot of suited connectors, pretty much any Broadway hand. Maybe even stuff like Queen 8 off. Just depends a lot on how wide the button is opening.
And how much he's discarding.
Yeah, exactly. But he doesn't have all that much to lose as the short stack and has to make a move soon anyway.
Yeah, that's kind of the fun position too. If you're not going to be the chip leader here, it's fun to kind of be the short stack, especially when you're not super short, such that you can have 3-bet shove fold equity. Yeah,
that makes it a lot easier. Tougher stacks to play are the mid ones. And obviously he was not shoving light.
What do you think about the call with ace 5?
I think it's a close call. If you're up against a reg who's shoving wide, like let's say this is a normal sit and go, a 180 man in the early stages, a reg shoves in the small blind, I think you're almost definitely getting the equity that you need. However, here you're going to need a bit more pot equity with the ICM tax. And so if Matson's isn't shoving pretty wide, then I might make a tight fold there.
No, I tend to agree with you, mainly for the ICM concerns.
Yeah, but certainly within reason, and if you do have a reg who's shoving wide in you there, it's very tough to raise fold a hand like a suited ace if you're opening a lot of hands anyway, because that is going to be one of the better hands you're opening comparatively.
But it was definitely a reasonable tank, obviously, too, with being a close decision.
Yeah, I don't really know how he missed that call, but then earlier he tanked with the ace-queen.
I probably multi-tabling.
Yeah, maybe he's like 25 tabling.
This would have been a snap call for me, too, with the ace 7 there.
Yeah, no debate necessary?
No.
Yeah, so effectively it's like 15 blinds. Once you adjust for the ante, it becomes a bit shorter. So a nice shove by Slayer Pull, and as you point out, a good call by 7 Tray. Raise and the 3-bet, blind on blind, and the stacks now have evened up a bit more. The shortest stack is 20 blinds, and so there's going to be a lot more even stacked aggression and a bit less ICM pressure with super short stacks.
So we might even see a flop, is what you're saying. That's not an all-in flop.
Dare I dream?
It should be interesting to see at what point these players go back to trying to play really long ball, being as this would be super long ball at these particular stack depths generally.
Yeah, absolutely. Another 3-bet shove. Now, at this point, very significant money, at least for most Myrtles, is at stake. 42K for fourth, 113K for first. Katie, you over the summer played in a lot of high-pressure situations with substantial money involved, both in your Venetian grade result and the WSOP main event. How do you let the money affect or not influence you when you get this deep?
I just don't think about it. That's part of why I like playing tournaments, because you just don't think about it in terms of you just are there to play the best you possibly can, and the chips I like thinking of as just being chips, and that's all it is, and trying to not be psyched out by any of the pressure that's around you.
Yeah, good advice for sure. We get to another flop, 3-7-8.
Would have been pretty surprised if there wasn't a C-bet there.
Yes, continuation bet, as I
will exclusively call it. Yes.
And finally, a check raise. Now, previously, Umamba was fairly tight in the big blind against 7 Tray, and now he's check raising. So, do you think that puts him on a much tighter range, or do you think it's maybe just the reverse stacks?
That's true. It's hard to say because the stack sizes are so different. But, it's a check raise that I'm going to like with a lot of hands. I think it's a pretty good time to check raise bluff, too, because you can check raise less than the size of the pot and have a very good shot at taking it down.
Yeah, absolutely. So he could have a nice result there for him. A lot of semi-bluffs in his range. Maybe he has a hand like Jack-9 of clubs with 6 overcard outs, 4 to the gut shot, another 1 or 1.5 for the backdoor flush. So he might be fairly wide there.
And now we're back to long ball.
Yeah, 25 blinds.
Wow. These people really don't want to play post-flop if they can help it.
No post-flop at all. So at this point, I don't know if he's on the same range we were talking about earlier, like pocket deuces, ace deuce type hands that are unexploitable shoves but don't play great post-flop, or maybe he's just doing that with his entire range, including premiums and junkier hands as well.
Yeah, if I was Slayer Pool, I would definitely be trying to figure out everything I knew about that guy in order to make a profitable call when he inevitably did it in the future.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And are they really going to see numbers again? You guys already looked four-handed. It's still four-handed, okay? For the sake of us commentators, you can look at numbers again now.
Or you can cut us into the prize pool.
Yeah, that would work.
Nah,
yeah, how much is Quadjack's paying us? I think like 20,000?
20 million. $20 billion. All
right, that's not so bad. That's our usual hourly, I'd say, about 18,000 an hour.
I love Quadjacks.
Great show, great program, super nice guys.
Mm-hmm.
And they really are discussing a deal again. Come on.
Well, they can't play small ball, so instead they're just going to discuss the deal for... No, I'm just kidding. These guys could be really good. I don't mean to slight them.
Yeah. And Kitty, like you pointed out too, I mean, it's true for a lot of these guys. For us right here, we're commentating, it's 9:48 p.m., For some of them, it's going to be well past midnight. For some, it's going to be closer to 5 a.m. I guess I could actually look and see where they're from and determine that. But, United Kingdom, Poland, Sweden, Germany, it's very late for them. And it's very easy to let your focus go a little bit. It happens to pretty much everyone at times.
Well, but that's part of poker, definitely. Part of poker is having the endurance to play the tournaments you can. And, personally for me, that means, not registering for a tournament unless I'm very confident I'll still be able to play my A game by the time it hopefully reaches a final table. So I think the people that argue that poker is a sport, that's really the strongest aspect of their argument.
Yeah, that's an excellent point there. Now, with the deal making, so no, once again, a fairly close cluster, and it really is a vital skill because one thing is that if you're a player who's very used to this and you're willing to walk away from a bad deal and put a lot of pressure on your opponents who want a deal, you can often get well more than your ICM equity through that process.
Yeah, some of the time I think that is what accounts for players who, go on a super hot streak and do really well in a series of tournaments. I think part of that, besides probably presumably playing very well too, can be explained by that kind of a phenomenon. Like when you're really not afraid of playing on, which unless you're a super recreational player who feels super outclassed by those around you, you really shouldn't be, if you're a poker player, ever really scared to play on.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to be willing to walk away from a bad deal. Now, as a general guideline, if you're not getting at least your ICM equity, unless you're in there at some crazy table with Phil Ivey and Durr and stuff, it's very rare you should take that deal.
Yeah, definitely.
And already 7 Trey and Slayer Pool are asking for more than their ICM equities. And that's the reason why this is always going to break down, because for any one player, if they get a few hundred or 1,000 or so more, then it's not going to make a huge difference. But when they all want it, there's just not going to be enough of the prize pool to go around.
Yeah, definitely. And then people get, egos involved too. But, I definitely wouldn't take a deal for less than my ICM chop value.
Absolutely. Now, how often, Katie, would you take one for exactly that value? Let's say you're offered your ICM equity, then is it pretty common that you would just take it to maybe lower the variance?
No, it's not pretty common. I definitely want more than my ICM. The only situations where, first of all, I can't ever actually recall having chop for that. The only situations where I will is if I feel that there is a player who is as good as me or possibly even better, and I view it as a high variance situation otherwise as well.
Even better. So in other words, never.
I can't remember ever, but
So Umambo is pointing out what we were saying, that if everyone wants more, it pretty much can't happen. And that's the thing. A lot of times, in fact, the majority of the times, as we were saying, it's just not fated to happen, or however you want to look at it, but nobody's willing to sacrifice their own equity. At least one person insists on getting more, and in those situations, sometimes you just have to play it on because it's not going to happen.
Yeah, usually, I think if someone is willing to give up money, it's because of some sort of weird situation, like, like someone has a flight the next day or someone really has to go for whatever reason and they're willing to take less because of that. And then, everyone wants to feel like they got to get a good deal in a chop. So four-handed, that's 4 people that can feel like that's not, advantageous.
Yeah, good point there. And they're still dealing. Once again, I think the odds makers are going to set the line comfortably in favor of something not happening, but you never know.
I think they're just trying to see if we can really commentate,
Yeah. Yeah. But your story, Katie, was very interesting earlier, and you're trying to get more than first place. And, if the other people, money's super significant to them, that story's maybe a little bit extreme, but there are definitely times, maybe particularly playing live, when you can get great deals just by holding out for more than your ICM equity and not being afraid to ask for it.
No, definitely. But obviously it's better when someone asks you, because when you're asked, they're the one who clearly wants it. I think some interesting situations arrive, particularly in the WSOP single table satellites, that in theory are one person paid in a 10-handed tournament, but usually they end up chopping.
Yeah, and so in a lot of those, just like you point out, sometimes the first one to say, hey guys, do you want to look at the numbers, is the one who has the least power, because he's the one who's made it clear that he's looking to deal.
Yeah, that's why I, start the deal talk very infrequently, and I really can't remember actually ever having started the conversation to ask for a deal.
Yeah, good policy. And now they're really just kind of taunting us because, a minute ago we at least had their chat to comment on, and now they're not even chatting.
Yeah, but that's real, It's just silent. They're all just going to sit out and see how it leads, how it happens.
Yeah, they're just going to sit out now. And yet again, 7 Trey saying I'll take 70, which is about 600 more than his ICM equity. And so that's what makes it tough. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, like, if I was content with 69,400, then I wouldn't hold up the deal to get another 600 or under 1% of that amount.
I don't know. If I felt like that wasn't the right number, I certainly would.
But for me, I could easily see objecting to the deal and asking for more, but it just 600 is such a small difference as a percentage that I would either be asking for significantly more or I would take the deal rather than hold it up for such a small increment.
I mean, yeah, that aspects of that are true, but if you were to play every single tournament and take a % off of your ICM chop value every single tournament, that would add up to a ton over time. And the bottom line is, as a good poker player, you shouldn't be looking for reasons not to chop. You should be looking for a very strong case for reasons that you should chop, and usually that is if the deal is advantageous for you.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. You has heard it directly from Katie Dozier herself.
But also, going back to those WSOP satellites and the idea of chopping live, that can be another reason why it's good if the players at your table like you. If the players at your table hate you in a WSOP satellite and, you have 10% of chips when you get heads up, it's very unlikely you'll get an amicable, a deal that's good for you. But, if you've been nice at the table and you've been gracious when you sucked out on people or whatever, inevitably, then you can be in a situation where you have like 30% of the chips when you're heads up and someone asks you if you want, your opponent asks if you want to take an even chop.
Yeah, so a lot of considerations there. And it's just a very complex thing that isn't often discussed as much of a lot of other aspects of tournament poker. But when it comes to the bottom line of final tables, it can be super important to your ROI.
Yeah, definitely. And I remember, when Full Tilt existed, and when they introduced the deal-making software, and I definitely did make deals a couple times, like heads up in a 90-man, but that was a situation where I felt like it was, I was getting what I should have out of the deal, and it was a situation where I was like 8 blinds steep heads up with a reg, who I thought was as good a shove fold as I was.
Yeah, which is nobody. You're the shove fold master, the super turbo queen.
I think that you might be referring to George 95, but...
Yeah, George's definitely a beast there. Now, Umama just did something I think kind of interesting, which is that it would decrease his chances of a bracelet with any deal. Now, the first thing is there really a bracelet here?
People are referring, I've seen, to bracelet hunting for this. I don't really know. Maybe it's like a rubber bracelet. No, maybe it's a real bracelet. I don't know. If someone wants to tell me on Twitter if I'm looking like an idiot.
Yeah, you guys can tweet that we're being extremely dumb.
Shaniac, if I look like an idiot right now or sound like one, please let me know.
Yeah, I guess he's being metaphorical. Maybe he's being literal. I'm not sure. But the other thing that's interesting about it is that the kind of person saying that, what he means presumably is that if there is a deal, then he's not going to be able to bully people around as much because they're not going to be as risk averse. And I would think the kind of person who makes that observation wouldn't really want to just take their ICM equity anyway because they think they could bully their opponents around.
No, that's a very good point, definitely. And the win, when you're in a situation where people are talking about a chop, I kind of take it as the chop is very unlikely to happen in the first place. So it's a good time to gain information about your opponents because they'll often say very, very direct things that correlate with how they feel about doing in the tournament. And one thing that will often become very apparent is how much value they take on like taking the belt, so to speak, and winning versus, having an advantageous deal.
Yeah, that's an absolutely good point. One thing that I remember from my early days of playing, there used to be on ESPN the final table broadcast of Greg Raymer's final table with commentary from him. And he mentioned in that one of the players, I forget whom now, he had overheard say that all he wanted to do was make $1 million. And so he bullied him around quite a bit because he knew that until that point he was going to be tighter. So if you can overhear things or even just be very observant as to what your opponents are saying and what you can learn from that, you may have a nice edge from that alone when it comes to deal-making strategy.
Yeah, or even before you reach that point, like in the main event this year, there was a guy to my right who was a super, super sweet guy that was total recreational player, had probably never played a tournament approaching a 10K buy-in in his life. He was this nice guy from Kentucky, and we got to talking, and I was talking in part because he was really nice and because I used to live in Kentucky, but also to get information. So, he told me his friend just bought him in because he was wearing like a t-shirt for his friend's brand. I did not bring up the fact that you really couldn't see the brand on his t-shirt. It was a real waste of $10,000. But, he told me, he's like, we started having this conversation about 4 hours in. He said 2 of his friends had already busted. And he said something that made it very clear to me that his goal was to make day 2. And this was in day 1. And, that information, especially in a 10K, is just so valuable, especially when the person is right by you.
Yeah, that information is crucial. Now, an interesting development, it looks like they have, in fact, made a deal. In a moment, I believe this will be finalized, but with Umamba and Madsen's getting similar, and Slayerpool and 7 Trey both being bumped up slightly to 70K, with 8,000 left to play for first.
I would not take that deal as Umamba, personally.
Yeah.
He's just in such a great position, I think, otherwise, and I just personally would not. Of course, though, I wouldn't come back and play super long ball, which is pretty much what I expect to see at this point, but...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, he does, from his comment, clearly realize you can bully people around without the deal. So it is surprising to me that he'd take it, even getting slightly less than his ICM share. But what it does go to show is that you never know. They both thought a deal wasn't going to be made, and for whatever reason, they wanted to lock up the money, and it happened.
Well, and probably part of it is that, this could be the largest cash Umamba ever had, and he was, perhaps late into the night getting a bit nervous.
Yeah, now of course I agree with you. Now that we both said that, somebody's going to tweet us that Umamba just won $8 million at the WPT. Not that they're probably that many with their prize pool, but we'll see what happens there. And Umamba's very upset because he didn't get a walk, and he was saying part of the deal was a walk. I assume that he was kidding around when he typed that.
Yeah.
So they are playing for 8K. There is still... at least for me, 8K would be pretty sweet no matter how much I'm winning in a tournament. And so there is definitely real money up for grabs still. But I'm very surprised that he thought his comment about wanting a walk was going to be taken seriously, because it's very tough to enforce. And it almost seems like it would border on collusion to have that predetermined he was going to get a walk.
I think it's... I think you're taking it a little seriously. If he really thinks that, then I don't know what to say. But...
You're right, there is that Kessler thread on 2+2, and that's only. I think that everything's collusion, even though it's probably not.
No, I don't. I think he's probably just kidding, and he probably feels like he just.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just saw Nanonoko was saying. Now, I wasn't looking at this as we said it, but don't speak about a walk, as it can be considered collusion and unfair gameplay.
Wow, he is on it. He deserves his spot on Team Online. Look at him.
Nanonoko laying down the law on this joint.
Yeah, gotta respect it up. Big it up to my man. Okay.
And Umamba, I mean, I really believe, I'd be curious to know what other people think, but my impression is when you type in, hey, give me a walk as part of the deal, then most people are going to think that you're not serious and are just being facetious as part of the deal making. Yeah,
it's still a stupid thing to say anything that could be construed as collusion, especially deep in this tournament with $8,000 at stake.
Yeah, so kind of a weird spot there. I expect that this may be discussed some on the forums, because it is a pretty odd situation where a player thinks that him getting a walk is formally part of a deal.
How could you don't think he really thought that, do you? How could he really think that?
He clearly thought that.
What?
He time banked 30 seconds when 7 Trey raised his blind.
How could he think that?
And was pissed off, and now he's still arguing about it. He definitely thought that.
As Matt Chang would say, what the hell?
Okay. Yeah, so I believe he really thought that. I think this is a pretty strange situation there.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about this is since they've made the deal, it's like the pressure's off, and now while they are a little bit deeper, like they're taking a much more small ball strategy, which would have been my preferred line if I had to pick one time or the other when all the money was still out there to be gained.
Yeah, that is pretty odd. And Umamba 3-bets and snap calls off the 4-bet. I suppose when he 3-bet, he had the plan in mind in advance
That he would suck out?
That he would suck out the ass end of the straight.
Wow. Now we've reached that awkward moment where Umamba seriously regrets having chopped, huh?
Wait, Umamba? Oh, yeah, because he has the bigger stack,
Yeah.
But a fine 3-bet by him. I think they were maybe slightly deep to stack off, but now I want to replay because that might be totally incorrect. So the effective stack between them was 27 blinds.
Nominally, though, and the ante is still pretty significant.
Yeah, if he does 3-bet there, I agree. He can 3-bet with the plan of folding 2 or 4-bet. So I think it's probably a reasonable line on his part to 3-bet and stack off there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a situation I would be thrilled with, but I think that I like that line better than flatting out of position. I think folding is terrible.
Yeah. Now we have one question here from Mitch Connor, which is that in ICM, the lower stacks skid more and the bigger stacks skid less. Relative to a chip chop, that is correct, and the mid stacks would be the ones usually least affected by that. And with a chip chop, everyone gets exactly corresponding to their chip stack without any account for the changing value of chips. So that's how it works. And ICM is the most common because it's the most accurate. Chips do decline in value. There are plenty of proofs of this and further explanations.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just important to know what you're gunning for when you're actually in this situation, I think.
Yeah. And I would even add, Katie.
Would you, Collin?
For more on this topic, one might see the text Sit and Go Strategy by Collin Moshman.
Oh, I'm sorry. I probably should have been the one to plug your book instead of you. It seems a bit rougher when you're the one plugging it. But yes, that's a very good point. There's a lot of great info in there about
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Okay, that's enough snooty, Collin.
So the blinds now up. Umamba has a massive chip lead, and what we're expecting now is for him to abuse these guys because this is where the payouts are the biggest. Well, they dealed, so I guess that doesn't actually apply.
Well, no, there's still 8,000 though. I mean, there's no reason to get third or second, so it's all just first.
Yeah, so for sure, 8,000. I think for any of these guys is going to be a pretty nice extra bonus there. And it will be interesting to see how much Umamba can bully them like he promised to do with this new deal of 8K for first as part of their agreement.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess another bad aspect of taking a chop is that, you know, after it you can feel pretty results-oriented as for how the chop went down. So that's why I like to only chop if I feel that it really is advantageous or neutral in a difficult situation for me.
Yeah, no question about it. Umamba thinking here, I'm thinking he might have a hand like deuces or queen jack. Yeah. He's got to have queen jack. That's like his entire range.
So that was roughly about how many blinds that went down for?
So the jack 7 was about 13 blinds. What do you think about that nominally?
I think that I like to figure out exactly how the ante is affecting it before I answer that question.
To me, it seems like it's right about on the cusp.
Yeah.
No problem. A little bit long ball, but no problem. And now, heads up, the key thing in terms of assessing heads up strategy is often going to be the effective stack. They're about 25 blinds deep, so a little bit deep, but not crazy, to 3-bet shove. And should be interesting to see how it plays out between these two.
Yeah, Slayer should be in the situation where he's happy to play pretty laggy, considering that it's basically a heads-up S&G for 8K now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like an 8K prize pool, 4K per side. And so, for pretty much anyone, a 4K heads-up sit and go, particularly with short stacks, it's tough not to take that seriously.
Yeah, definitely. Although it can be a trap people fall into when they just dealt for quite a bit more than 8,000, but...
Yeah, that's a really good point. You never want to look at it from the perspective of, well, this is small compared to earlier. It's still a lot of money. And if you don't take it seriously now, in a couple of days, you're going to regret that.
Yeah, definitely. And if you can't take it seriously at the end of a tournament, you shouldn't have registered in the first place, in my opinion.
Yeah, excellent point.
So was that a limp?
Yeah, Umamba limped. I think part of the reason is that he maybe doesn't want to get 3-bet shoved a lot. I would expect that he's going to be on a fairly weak range for open limping. I would expect him to raise most of his stronger hands. I don't think he's trapping.
It's a slightly largest bet size, though, wouldn't you say?
2/3 of the flop?
Yeah.
Yeah. And based on the snap fold of the check raise, I think most likely he was weak there. And I like Slayer Pool open raising. I think a min raise is going to be how I would play most of my buttons at this stage.
Yeah, I tend to like if you're deciding to incorporate a limping strategy heads up, trying to limp for the first time with a stronger hand as opposed to what the person is going to expect you to have.
Yeah, that's a good point. In fact, it's not actually such a bad idea if your opponent open limps when that's not usually the case. Then if you're on the fence, go ahead and attack it. I believe more often than not, it is going to be weakness.
Yeah, and extremely so, I would say.
Yeah. They're slightly deeper now. They're closer to 30 blinds. And despite their tendencies for long ball, I think it would be a mistake with most hands for either to 3-bet shove until the effective stack decreases a bit.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. It would be taking a really high variance route.
Yeah, but no problems with flatting. Facing a min raise, you're going to be getting well over 3-1. So we could, in theory, see another flop soon.
Yes. Well, that's something that's important to note when you are heads up and you go from a really short effective stack to one that's a lot deeper. It can be something where you need to mentally note that. Otherwise, you could end up playing way more long volley than you even realized because you just fell into the lull of how deep it was for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely important to adjust that. Umamba makes a smaller 3-bet there, which I like. It's a nice sizing there. It's going to be tough for Slayer Pool to know if he's doing that to induce a 4-bet shove or to just make a bluff. So I think that's pretty good sizing with anything he wants to 3-bet.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it also shows that he's taking this tournament seriously in the $8,000 to me and not just like, oh, well, shoving isn't totally crazy, so I'll just shove.
Yeah, no question about it.
Also could just be that he had aces and won an action.
Yeah, could just be that as well. You never know. But they continue on with about 25 blinds, and I think that Slayer Pool in particular is looking for an excuse to play long ball. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes back to 3-bet shoving.
Yeah.
And just as I say that, the fundamental rule, he 3-bets small.
Yes. Is this the first smaller 3-bet we've seen from him, heads up?
I think it may be.
Yeah.
And Umamba flats, Katie, do you think he's on a fairly wide range with position and good odds, or do you think he's pretty tight at this point?
I think if he was tight, he probably, if he was on a strong range, he probably just would have shoved.
Yeah. Yeah, so it is possible that he's trying to trap with aces or a high pair, but I agree.
Well, not after that flop. It's not possible.
That would be pretty strange if you had folded aces at that flop.
I view these people as pushing the action pretty regularly when they have. I don't expect to see slow plays, but now that I've said that, we'll probably will see one.
Yeah. It's the same thing with coaching, too. Like, anytime that I'm coaching someone, it's like a live sweat or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, this person has to be strong. This has to happen.
It's like the one time.
Wrong every time.
Yeah.
Every single time. It's the same here. Absolute statements tend to really bite you in the ass in poker.
Kind of feels similar to having aces in the big blind and getting a walk, I guess.
Yes. Which is the other rule. If you do have aces in the big blind, you will get a walk. So we go to a flop, and it should be interesting to see how defensive Slayer Pool gets out of position, whether he's going to play hit to win or continue on and give Umamba trouble on the later streets.
Yeah, the bet size, the c-bet size on the flop was pretty congruent with what we would see if he had hit or missed, in my opinion. So we can't deduce a lot from that, from Umamba.
Yeah, now this 2/3 pot bet. The 4 of diamonds doesn't change things too radically. To me, that looks fairly strong when another low card hits, and he suddenly bets 2/3 of pot. It looks to me like he's trying to protect a decently strong hand with the flush draw and low straight cards potentially out there.
Yeah, that's definitely exactly how it appears to me as well. If he had continued in a smaller manner, then I would think perhaps he was more likely he was bluffing and not as much trying to protect his hand.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And now the other dynamic was Slayer Pool having the button. They go to a turn, and this isn't a great card to barrel. Really good cards to barrel would be an ace, maybe a card like the Queen of Hearts that would be another overcard to second pair. But he does size it smaller, so it's tough to say whether he's potentially barreling or just on a value range here.
To me, it looks slightly more value-y. given, I mean, this is obviously the biggest pot they've played. And
Nasty river for Slayerpool, counterfeiting his 2-pair.
That's pretty gross.
And Katie, what do you think of the way that they both played that with their weak King X hands?
On the surface, it definitely looked pretty reasonable, and as we said on the turn, the sizing was, indicative of him trying to get value. I think he could have c-bet a bit more on the flop.
I agree. I also think at the turn, half pot is too small. It's really coronated. A lot of rivers he's not going to want to see. And he also wants to manipulate the pot such that the river bet would be a shove or close to it. So if I were him, I would definitely bet more at the turn against most opponents.
Yeah, that's a good point. He's, by making the bets smaller on the flop and the turn, he's making it more difficult for the player to put in his whole stack with a weaker hand.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And another post-flop pot brewing with Umamba having continuation bet, I believe, after raising C-bet, after raising pre-flop, throwing in another barrel at the turn. Now, this one, though, is tougher to evaluate. Like we've pointed out, that overcard can be a good one to bluff. So he might still be on a wider range. Slayerpool presumably has something like 10x, maybe just ace-high hero calling.
He could have, I was going to say.
I'm going to say pocket twos are the same category as what I said.
I was just about to say something like fours. I wasn't literally going to say twos, but yeah. I mean, I agree that you're probably getting called if you decide to fire another barrel there, given the action.
Yeah. And we might have also expected him to 3-bet. It's a little bit deep, so if he 3-bet, you pretty much have to call with the 4-bet shove. So maybe a reasonable time to flat there with a pocket pair. For sure, if they were like 20 blinds deep, he could have just 3-bet shoved.
Yeah.
But if that stacked up, a little bit awkward, a reasonable line on Slayerpool's part.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So the blinds have gone up to 7140K.
Yes, and the effective stack now is about 30 blinds.
Definitely a very significant amount in the pot to start. Of course, adjusting for the ante becomes less significant heads up when there are fewer antes in the pot, but I still think it's an important thing to note and something a lot of players overlook because you shouldn't be treating it as though there isn't an ante, and I think a lot of players do for simplicity's sake.
Yeah. And in fact, the presence of an ante heads up led Harrington in one of his early books, if I recall, to say that you should always at least open limp heads up post ante, and you should pretty much never fold your button.
I don't agree that you should pretty much. I mean, you should rarely fold your button, but obviously it depends on your opponent, how often you're getting 3-bet and stuff like that. But in practice, I'm not limping very often.
Yeah. More on that in a second. Slayerpool now has a very good bluffing opportunity if he doesn't have a club. If he has a hand like even Queen X, betting here is probably going to be inefficient. But if he has no showdown value, this is a good spot to bluff. And interesting sizing here with the quarter pot bet.
It really looks like he has the flush with that sizing, and he's just trying to get a thin amount of value, which is partially why it is so good if it is a bluff. If I was going to bluff this, I would bet a bit over 300 and didn't have the flush, but...
Yeah, it looks like thin value. And Umamba, really interesting check raise here. And it could be a bluff. It could be that it didn't look like a strong bet to him. He's getting a good risk-reward ratio on a check raise, so it really wouldn't surprise me if he was bluffing there.
Yeah. Well, part of it is, too, like when I'm trying to think about bet sizing in spots like that, over 300 looks like way more than just 25K, more than 275 in my opinion. And so I think that would have been a slightly better bet.
Yeah, good point there. And yeah, like you were saying about the Harrington comment, I mean, one issue also is that, well, you are getting great odds to at least limp. The problem if you do limp with a hand you wouldn't otherwise play is that then, unless you're playing against a very unobservant, loose passive player, you sometimes also have to limp strong or you're going to be very predictable, and that's kind of a tough metagame to manage.
No, yeah, that's why I like to be aggressive. Be aggressive. Be aggressive.
What was that? What was that?
That was a cheerleading cheer. Get over it.
Okay.
That's real.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it? So they go back to a lot of opening and 3-betting. Now, what would you expect Umamba to shove here as he does?
Oh, wow, this is going fast.
It's a pretty reason by both players, and looks like Umamba has taken this down. I think that's a good open and a good play by both players.
Yeah.
Umamba takes it. Very well done. Nice work, Umamba.
Yes, nice work. I know he's probably sitting at home pretty frustrated that he chopped, but that's part of the problem with chopping some of the time is, remembering not to be results oriented after the fact if you end up shipping it.
Yeah, absolutely.